That was what his work was. And many people have criticized B.F. Skinner for seeing people as animals, essentially.
Okay, so this is an interesting point that Caleb Marpin makes here. He takes exception to the fact that humans are animals. But the fact is, humans are animals. Doesn't matter how much we might be doing technological advances, that we have some verbal skills, that we're different to other animals in that regard. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether animals are like us, other animals are like us or not. We happen to all be animals. Unfortunately, we have this human supremacist attitude that because we can do certain things that other animals do not, somehow that makes us better than them and means that we can then use them as resources and exploit them. Well, other animals, there are a lot of other animals can do a lot of amazing things that we can't do. Does that mean they're better than we are? No, it doesn't. But for some reason, we've decided that because we can oppress and dominate animals that are not human, that means that they must be lesser because we can and because they can't fight back. Now, does that sort of attitude remind you of anything? US imperialism, maybe? White supremacy? Colonialism? Reminds me of that. And it also reminds me of the attitudes we had towards... Now, I'm getting ahead of myself because he hasn't actually said much in this yet. I'm stopping it there because I'm pointing out the humans are not animals that he's going to say next, and then he's going to talk about how wonderful we are and how we're better than we're better than animals. He calls them animals. I call them other animals because humans are animals too. So I'll let him continue on, but and I'll talk more about that.
And seeing people as just, as just capable of avoiding pleasure or avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, right? We're all rats in a maze. And that people look at B.F. Skinner and see kind of a sociopathic view of mankind, a kind of belief that people are just these easily manipulated, hogs and sheep, and did he do experiments on animals? Yes, he did.
Skinner was just another speciesist scientist who used animals as resources. He experimented on animals and did cruel experiments, which we do today. We're doing all sorts of experiments on animals. So I'm not sure why Caleb Marpin is using this man as an example in relation to animal rights. But anyway.
And he did experiments on his own children. And I'm not an expert on B.F. Skinner's life in particular, but people say that he was particularly, nasty to his children. And nasty to children he did experiments on, from what I understand. And that's B.F. Skinner. Ruben Garcia says Tyson chicken factory farming, animal research, PETA, conservation, and the World Wildlife Fund, to be more specific. Well, the World Wildlife Fund, very interesting, was started by the British.
Any of these groups, including PETA, there's nothing animal rights about them. PETA probably is the closest to that, but really they just promote humane use of animals, which doesn't exist. There's no such thing as non-abusive use of animals, and even if there were, it would still be wrong. So PETA is about PETA, and most of their membership is not vegan, and you cannot call yourself an animal rights activist if you are not at least vegan.
That was started by a member of the British royal family, I believe. They're more conservative. I think the Sierra Club folks are like Democratic Party environmentalists.
The World Wildlife Fund and the Sierra Club and those like it actually promote hunting.
World Wildlife Fund tend to lean toward Republican kind of solutions. And I guess you're asking about animal rights. Well, I am against...
Now, he's going to say that he's against cruelty. But then he's going to talk about why he thinks it's okay for us to use animals because they're less. Basically, he's saying because they're lesser than we are. We can do things they can't, and therefore that means we can use them. They're somehow stupid or they're inferior. Now, as I said, where does that ring a bell? When you decide because of difference that another group is lesser than you are, how often do we see violence follow that sort of unfortunate discrimination. And in this case, it's speciesism, but we see this in racism, sexism, heterosexism, and the things they're based on discriminations that are based on irrelevant criterion. In the case of animals, they're another species, so what? And they don't have to be like us to deserve the right not to be used as a thing, just as people who are disabled in the early 20th century, they were being experimented on because we thought, well, they can't do what so-called able people can do, therefore that means they're lesser, therefore we can experiment on them. And they experimented on, the establishment experimented on black people, gave them syphilis in the United States, did all sorts of things to black people that's appalling, and trying to oppress them, trying to completely disempower them, and that continues. Well, why is that happening? Because it's a white supremacist society that, based in white supremacy, and it has tremendous racist structural racism. So this attitude decides that black people are lesser, that black people, because the color of their skin is different from white people, and that that means that they're lesser. I mean, these discriminations are based on these ridiculous, they're based on an irrelevant criterion. In the case of black people, it's race. In the case of animals, it's species. In the case of in LGBTI people, it's to do with gender and sexual orientation. There's these irrelevant criterions that put another group in a lesser category, which means they become targets of violence. And this is sort of something that on the left I find, the transphobia on the left is appalling, and it desperately needs education. But it's often the case, particularly male commentators I find, have no interest in finding out about that. Absolutely none. Zero. Zilch. Which tells me something about those particular commentators. Because if you're not afraid, if you're desperately trying to cling to a dominant paradigm, this binary, this completely narrow idea of what gender is and narrow idea of what sexuality is, then you're very threatened by anything outside this constructed binary. Then you're going to push against it, no matter how woke or whatever you think you are. If I hate that word, but however sort of intelligent you think you are, if you're afraid of difference, you're going to struggle like hell to prevent any sort of change to that, to the binary, change to the idea that that maybe humans are not supreme on this planet, that they just happen to be another animal who is also, by the way, our species is also destroying the planet and basically enslaving, killing, and maiming and torturing 99.99% of the planet's population who are non-human. We're actually outnumbered on this planet. But we are, and this is another thing that some people on the left seem to not take into account when they talk about overpopulation being some sort of racist concept, and yes, it can be used that way, but overpopulation is a human supremacist thing in relation to humans. We're actually driving out most of the planet's population who are non-human simply because we can. And we don't seem to care that we're destroying their environment. Their habitat is our habitat. And we don't care. We're destroying the oceans. Look at Seaspiracy on Instagram and have a look at the images on that, and you'll see how insane the fishing that is going on and the destruction that causes. Look at Cowspiracy, the sustainability secret, the documentary. See what we're doing in relation to animal agriculture. Putting aside the tremendous violence of animal agriculture, the absolute, what we're doing, and you've probably seen me share those two memes about what the largest study to date, 119 countries, 40,000 farms, from farm to fork, 90% of all we eat, and they came up with the conclusion, this largest study to date in the journal Science, that we need to adopt a plant-based diet, not just for because animal agriculture is one of the greatest contributors to the climate crisis, but also because of eutrophication, acidification, water shortages, land shortages, and so forth. So, I mean, it's a human supremacist position to say that overpopulation doesn't matter and that it's only a racist concept, and it doesn't matter if we're social, and if under socialism it'll be wonderful because we'll still be using this planet like it's a resource. It doesn't matter what system we're under. Socialism, capitalism. Capitalism is a disaster, and it can only be a disaster, and it's always inextricably linked to imperialism. But socialism, if we treat this planet like it's an infinite resource, that is a disaster too. If we treat this planet like other animals don't matter on it, and we will because we're not vegan, then of course that's a disaster too. So socialism, capitalism, it's all going to be a disaster if we continue to think that other animals on this planet are irrelevant and they're only here for us to look at, or to use, or to experiment on, or to study. They're nations too, and they're not destroying the planet. They're not bringing us to the edge of extinction. We are. So how good can we be? Some people sort of carry on about how wonderful humans are. Please. We are a disaster. And we are bringing ourselves to extinction. It becomes more and more clear every day that that's unstoppable because and I say this without misanthropy, we're too stupid to live.
Cruelty to animals. Any time where people are taking delight in cruelty is wrong, right? And that cruelty...
Okay, you cannot have... Now, this is something I wish Caleb Marpin had looked into before he started talking about veganism, because he hasn't thought this through, and it's really sad when people sort of talk about animal rights and they really don't have much of an idea what that actually means. And I'm not surprised because there's so much confusion put out by large animal groups about, in their presentation of animal rights, as if as long as we treat them humanely, it will be just fine. That it's morally justifiable to treat them. As long as we use them humanely, it's morally justifiable to use them. And it's not. That's not rights. The minute you become property and a resource, that's not rights. Doesn't matter how much people say, oh, look, we have a nice little hobby farm. Look how wonderfully we're treating them. It's not about treatment, it's about the use of them. And in the end, they all wind up in the same awful slaughterhouse. So when people say, I'm against cruelty to animals, but I think it's okay to use animals and to, use them and then kill them, well, that's ridiculous. You cannot have, there's no such thing as humane use of animals. And death is a harm too.
Cruelty to animals is linked to cruelty to people. Serial killers torture animals when they're children. People who torture animals, people who engage in acts of cruelty against animals are also very likely to engage in acts of cruelty against people.
Okay, the very act of animal farming is torturing and killing. And have you ever seen slaughterhouses on YouTube? Have a look. And you'll also notice that a lot of people who work in slaughterhouses end up with PTSD. They also end up doing sadistic acts on animals. The whole slaughterhouse thing is cruel and abhorrent. It's a horror house. The whole act of factory farming, which is widespread, it's not, when I use the word factory farming, I mean industrialized farming. Factory farming is never going to end while most of the public are not vegan. So basically anybody who's saying, I'm not okay with factory farming, I want everything to turn into little mom and pop farms everywhere, is delusional, because the population will increase and the demand for animal products will increase, and factory farming, or industrialized farming as I like to call it, because free range farming is also now industrialized, big 50,000 chickens in a big shed and all this sort of thing. That's never going to end, because demand is going to keep going, and they're going to do what's economically efficient, and that means they're going to always cram as many animals into small spaces as they can to meet demand. So the only way to end factory farming, the only way to end cruelty, is to become vegan. There is no other way. Anybody who thinks there's another way is deluding themselves to make their conscience feel better so they can consume animal products. And giving money to large animal organizations is not going to discharge your moral responsibility. The only way to actually do the right thing by not only other animals and the planet is to go vegan.
We know that, and that the part of the human mind that would take pleasure in harming an animal is the part of the human mind that would take pleasure in harming a person. So I'm against cruelty to animals. Totally against it.
Okay, if he's totally against cruelty to animals, then he needs to be vegan. Because you cannot have any animal product is a product of tremendous cruelty and also killing of animals. So the only way to end cruelty to animals is not to find better ways of using them and better ways of doing the morally wrong thing. The only way to end cruelty to animals is to go vegan.
Not in favor of cruelty to animals, right? It's wrong. That said, animal rights is not correct. And the reason
Animal rights is not correct. What does that mean? Animal rights simply means that other animals have the right, because they're sentient, not to be used as a thing, not to be used as property. They weren't born on this planet for us to use them. Religion might promote that. That's a speciesist, human supremacist. They're based in, a lot of religions are based in patriarchal values and human supremacy and speciesism. So of course, we're going to say something like that. Of course they're going to promote things like that. But they're not here. They were here on the planet, just like we are, to live their lives uninterfered with and not to be enslaved and exploited.
The reason for that is rights are by definition human.
Who says? Who says they're human? Humans do, right? Who said once upon a time that black people don't deserve the right to be anything other than property, the property of white people? White people said that. People in power, oligarchs, colonialists, white supremacists said that. Did it have any basis in reality? Did the fact that they were from a different country and they had a different colored skin, did that make them lesser? No. It was just an invention by white people who had power at the time and who could dominate, did that, and enslaved them, brought them in slave ships, treated them like things, killed them, raped them, enslaved them, did all sorts of unspeakable things to them. And that was seen as morally acceptable because it was the law at the time. And now we have, and we have had for a long time in law, that animals are property. And you cannot have rights if you're property. And where is this property status based on? The fact that they're another species. Just because they are another species, Caleb Marpin might think that because you can't give animals rights because they're another species. Rights in his eyes means driving cars or the right to vote and all that sort of thing. Somehow he thinks that if you're able to do all those things, that makes you morally more important, morally superior than animals, because they don't do that. They don't need to do that. In fact, we've actually created a very, very complicated society, which is actually very dysfunctional, mentally unhealthy, and people are killing themselves. It's actually anti-human what we've created in our society. So all these things that we've created also are dysfunctional. The right to vote, driving tons of steel around and putting fossil fuel emissions in the air and all of this. These are all dysfunctional things. Other animals are just living their lives, and they have the right to do so, and it doesn't matter that they don't do the things we do. They don't have to be like us to have the right not to be used as a thing, and we need to stop thinking that way about other animals. We need to stop thinking that somehow they're lesser because they're not like us, because that is the basis of all these discriminations, that black people and other races are lesser because they're not like us, that people that are in the LGBTI community are lesser because they're not like us, and so on. That Muslims are lesser because they're not like us, or whatever it is. There's all these different discriminations based on a relevant criterion, and we have to get rid of that to move forward. And there's a saying by Tolstoy, where there are slaughterhouses, there'll be battlefields, and I believe that. All these things are faces of the same ignorance. All these discriminations, racism, sexism, heterosexism, speciesism, and so for sexism, misogyny, etc., they're all faces of the same ignorance, and they all lead to violence, and we need to move forward. So when Caleb starts talking about how animals aren't able to do what we are doing, well, does that mean, under that definition, does that mean that people that are differently abled are also lesser because they're not able to do what a lot of people can do? Does that mean that? Because under his definition, that's what that means, basically.
probably am offending a lot of people here. I'm just telling you, I'm against cruelty to animals. I don't think animals should be treated cruelty. But rights are by definition human, right?
You see, this is where it goes awry with people who haven't read anything. They haven't read, for example, Mind If I Order the Cheeseburger, and other questions people ask vegans. That's it, by Sherry F. Cobb, Professor Sherry F. Cobb. He should read that book, and he'll find out. She gives very, very logical, methodical ways of going through these issues, and also check out UVE Archives, Unpopular Vegan Essays in archive form. I'll leave a link to it in the information section, or check out my vegan resource in podcast form, howtogovegan.org, where I actually read out a number of these essays about this issue. People need to get educated before they start talking about what they think animal rights are, because it's coming from a completely speciesist and unresearched position, and it's not helpful. And there's enough vegans now on the planet that people should not, they shouldn't have been doing that in the first place, but they should have been looking into this before really talking about it this way. Because there are reasons why so many people are opting to be vegan. Not just because it's tremendous violence that we're doing to other animals for completely unnecessary reasons of mostly palate pleasure. We're actually using them because we think they taste good. And even though we don't need those animal products at all to survive, and we can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason we're killing 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year is because we think they taste good. That's simply all it is. We don't need them at all to survive, and it's destroying the planet absolutely tremendously. The contribution of animal agriculture to the climate emergency is tremendous, and I just cited those 2 memes. So we're going to have to stop this. It's insane what we're doing, and we're going to have to stop this human supremacist nonsense. Because it's just an extension of all these other discriminations, the racism, sexism, and all of that. And they're all, where you have one, you will have all of them. There are so many people on the left who are misogynist or transphobic. There's reasons for that, because it's all otherization. It's all otherization, otherizing people or otherizing animals based on an irrelevant criterion. So where you have one, where you have speciesism, you will have all those other kinds.
You have rights because you are a human. Rights are things that you have in the context of a human society. Animals cannot vote, okay? Animals cannot run for office.
And just like I said, this is a terrible and very weak argument. There are lots of people on the planet right now who are differently abled, who cannot vote, they can't run for office, they can't drive a car, and so forth. Does that mean that they don't deserve rights? This is a really old, outdated argument. A really old one that has no basis in any sort of fact, really.
Right? Animals, by definition, don't have rights, right? Rights are things that we agree upon as humans as part of a social contract. I have the right to not be killed, so we have laws against murder. And the idea is I can't kill other people, and other people can't kill me. I have my right to not be killed. The state protects my right. Rights are things that the state protects, that we enter a social contract and agree for the state to protect. Animals are not things, are not.
And how animals are not things. Yes, he accidentally said that. Animals are not things. That's exactly right. They're sentient beings. And in a human supremacist, speciesist society, we're not going to give up that power of being able to use animals as things, as resources. Animals cannot push back against the exploitation and the discrimination and the violence. They can't do that. So it's actually our moral responsibility not to exploit and torture and kill and trap and maim and use them as property. They're a vulnerable group. So we have a moral responsibility not to do that. That is what Caleb Marpin isn't thinking about. Just as we have a moral responsibility not to persecute and oppress vulnerable groups of humans, like LGBTI people, which I'm not sure where he is on that. And so, I won't go into that, but I'm talking about trans people now. But we have a right, we have a moral responsibility not to vilify and persecute not to vilify and persecute vulnerable groups of humans. And the same goes for the whole vulnerable group of non-humans who are the most vulnerable group on the planet. We have a moral responsibility not to treat them as things and resources because they are the most vulnerable.
They don't engage in human rights. We can't have an animal. We can't have a meeting with a bunch of hogs and sheep and decide whether or not they have the right to. We can't do that, right?
I've explained what's wrong with that.
It's not foreseeable, not possible. Animal rights, by definition, is kind of an oxymoron, right? Rights.
Only in your mind, if you've been indoctrinated since birth, which we all have, to view animals as things here for us to use, or to be our companion, or to fetishize, or to look at as entertainment, to experiment on, we've been indoctrinated to think that way. Babies don't have that attitude towards animals. We educate them, we indoctrinate them in every way. Media-wise, parents do that, school does it. We indoctrinate them constantly that animals are here to be used. And they see it every day, animals in the fields that are being exploited, dogs and cats and other domesticated animals being sold as things, and so forth. There's, animal products on our plate that were once living sentient beings. They see it all the time. And so by the time they're, able to even say anything, speak or walk, they completely are indoctrinated into this speciesism, which is very sad and is the result of tremendous violence, and it's all for nothing. It's all because we think they taste good, because, as I said, we do not need animal products at all to survive, at all. And I'm proof of that. I've been vegan 15 years, one of the best decisions I've ever made. So I wish when people started talking about this sort of thing, instead of brushing it off, because underneath it all, people know, when they talk about this stuff, they know what they're doing is a result of violence. They know that, but they don't want to think about it, and they try and push it away by making what they think are rational. He thinks this is a sort of a rational reason why he can continue to use animals. But underneath it, why would you even bother even making an argument about that if you didn't think there was something wrong that you're doing? And most people do. I find oftentimes, even just telling people that you're vegan, you'll say they immediately start going, "Oh, I don't eat much meat. I'm and all this sort of thing. I eat very little meat." I often get people immediately saying that, and I think, why are they saying that to me? I just said I was vegan, that was all I said. And then they start making these excuses and that shows, and it happens with such regularity. It just shows how much people underneath it all know there's something wrong with what they're doing.
Are by definition a human thing. That doesn't mean that cruelty to animals is a good thing. Cruelty to animals is a bad thing, right? And it's closely tied into cruelty to people, animal exploitation, factory farms. We can go down the line. There's plenty of bad things out there, right? The way our food system runs in the United States is very unsustainable, and there's
animal agriculture, as I said, is completely unsustainable, and you cannot have a non-abusive. There's no such thing as non-abusive use of animals. You either are vegan or you're causing cruelty and killing of animals. There's no in between. There's no third choice that's justifiable. It's either one or the other. You're either vegan or you're participating in tremendous cruelty and death.
Plenty of things to criticize. So don't pretend that I'm just trashing those who would be concerned about such a thing as animal rights as being completely false. They're not, and they have very legit criticism, I think, of the way our food production apparatus works. That said, the term animal rights is technically not correct.
I think there'd be a lot of professors and a lot of people that would disagree with that. Not correct. What does that even mean, not correct? What that really means is I don't agree with that because I think I want to continue using animals. And so I'm not going to even think it through. Because if I have to think it through, or if I have to even look at what I'm doing, that's going to cause a more cognitive dissonance, and I may not be able to continue eating, wearing, and using animals. That's what that says. So, these sort of arguments are getting lesser and lesser as time goes by, because I think there's so many vegans now on the planet. There's a certain percentage now which actually starts to affect the whole planet, basically. There's enough of a consciousness there now that what we're doing is outrageous and it's violent, a tremendous violence, that it's actually permeating communities, and it's really, really widespread now. Veganism is no longer a fringe philosophy. It's no longer something that people can blow off. It's no longer something that when you look on the net now, you used to once, about 10 years ago, used to see about 95% of the articles on veganism were really negative and complete rubbish. They're still pretty rubbishy, a lot of them now, but they're not negative. There's a lot of misinformation in them. There's a lot of so-called animal rights groups who actually are not animal rights groups. They're still promoting this complete myth of humane use of animals, and they very rarely mention veganism, and they promote a lot of single-issue campaigns, and the reason they do that is so that they can ask for money. If they ask people to go vegan, they might run out of a career. If everybody became vegan, they may not have a career in PETA anymore and be getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars coming into PETA. If they just asked people straight out and they didn't have all these single-issue campaigns. When most of the people on the planet are vegan, there won't be any. There's no need for these single-issue campaigns. If you agree that animals are sentient and they're not here for us to use, that ends all sorts of different kinds of use. This picking one particular issue like fur, hardly anybody wears fur, but everybody's eating animal products. If people care about what's on their plate, they're going to care about fur, they're going to care about horse riding, they're going to care about dogs being killed in Korea and all this sort of stuff, all these racist single-issue campaigns that focus on other countries as if their animal use is worse than our animal use. A lot of these single-issue campaigns are based in misogyny and racism. We just need to go vegan. All these animal groups, if they just ask people to go vegan, they'd probably have not a long career in that, because there'd be so many more vegans on the planet if the likes of PETA and Mercy for Animals and all these other sad sort of animal groups, large animal groups that are bloated and are pulling in millions and millions, if they just asked everybody to go vegan, we would probably have a lot more vegans on the planet now. Anyway, that's really all I was going to say. It kind of aggravates me when I see people talking about this issue and they haven't done any reading about it, and they're speaking from a completely speciesist viewpoint, and it's sad. And it's also sad because, as I said, veganism is no longer a fringe philosophy. So people are going to have to stop seeing it as something that's sort of, I don't think a lot of people see it as kind of crazy anymore. It's something that they can really see a truth in, and they see also that animal agriculture is destroying the planet, and they also see that factory farming, all sorts of there's industrialized farming is all these different scammy things like free range and enriched cages and all that sort of stuff. They're all just a kind industrialized farming too, and they're all abusive, and in the end the animals are killed anyhow when they're no longer productive. And I've done some videos about why factory farming is never going to end unless we all go vegan. I've done some videos about that, but check out my humane what's in a word video, and I talk about that. I did an essay on it and I read it out. And check out my vegan resource, howtogovegan.org, for more information. So thanks so much for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please click the like button if you like the content. Please click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive notifications when I drop a video. Till next time, bye for now.